Henry and I have been married for 5 years now. I thought our marriage was going great until out of nowhere, my husband confessed to having an affair with my freaking sister. You see, we're both doctors, and while that might seem glamorous or fulfilling to outsiders, it also brings its own set of complexities into our relationship. The long hours, the emotional toll of caring for patients, and the fact that we are both deeply passionate and good at what we do means that our marriage hasn't always been picture perfect. Balancing our careers with personal time has been tough, and there have been moments when the weight of our jobs made things more difficult. But through it all, we've managed to support each other. He is my partner, and I never had any shred of doubt in my head that I would be spending the rest of my life with him. In fact, 2 months ago, I discovered that I was pregnant. When we first got married, Henry and I were eager to start a family. We tried for a while, but despite our hopes and best efforts, it just never happened for us, so eventually, we made peace with it. We stopped actively trying, telling ourselves that if it was meant to be, it would happen in its own time. Letting go of that dream was hard, but we poured our energy into our careers and our relationships, trusting that fate would guide us. So, when I suddenly started experiencing morning sickness, I didn't immediately jump to conclusions. Part of me thought it might just be stress or something related to work, but I decided to take a pregnancy test anyway just to rule out the possibility. When the result came back positive, I was completely floored. It was such an overwhelming moment, full of disbelief and excitement. I never thought that after all these years, I would find myself staring at that little test, realizing I was going to have a baby. The emotions washed over me in waves, and I had to sit down to process the reality that I was actually pregnant. It was a mix of joy and wonder. At that moment, my first thought was to share the news with Henry. I knew how much this would mean to him after everything we'd been through. But at the time, he was away at the time, attending a series of medical conferences. This news was too important to be shared over the phone or through a quick text message, so I decided to wait until he returned so I could tell him face to face, knowing that seeing his reaction in person would make the moment all the more meaningful. The day Henry was supposed to come back from his trip, I had everything planned out perfectly. I wanted to make the moment special, to celebrate the incredible news that I was pregnant. I had arranged a lunch for us at our favorite restaurant, the one we always went to for important occasions or when we just needed some time to ourselves. It was a place that held a lot of memories for us, quiet, cozy, and with all the imagine the joy and surprise on his face when I told him the news, thinking of how this moment would be the start of a new chapter in our lives. When I went to pick him up at the airport, though, I could immediately sense that something was off. Henry looked preoccupied, almost lost in thought. He didn't greet me the way he usually would. There was no warm hug, no excitement in his eyes at seeing me after being apart for a while. He barely even said hello, and I could feel the distance in his demeanor. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe the long flights or the stress of the conference had taken a toll on him. I mentioned the reservation at our favorite restaurant, hoping that it would lift his mood and give us a chance to reconnect. But to my surprise, he sighed, visibly irritated, and said, "We should probably cancel and just head back home." His tone was sharp, almost as if he were annoyed at the idea. I was taken aback by his reaction. I mean, it wasn't like we had any other major plans for the day, and I thought a nice lunch together would be just the thing to help him unwind. I reasoned with him, saying that since we'd probably end up ordering takeout anyway, it would be better to enjoy a quick lunch out and then head home. He sighed exasperatedly and gave me a curt nod. Then, as if I weren't even there, he went back to looking at his phone, scrolling absent-mindedly, while I drove us to the restaurant. By the time we got to the restaurant, the energy between us felt heavy. We took our seats at the table, but Henry hardly spoke a word. Wanting to ease the tension, I asked him about the conference, hoping to spark some conversation. But his responses were short, cold, and distant, just one-word answers that didn't lead anywhere. It was so unlike him. Normally, after these trips, he would share stories about the people he met, the interesting talks he attended, or the new ideas he came across. But this time, it felt like he was holding something back, and I couldn't help but wonder what was really going on. To be fair, I had noticed a slight shift in Henry's behavior in the past few weeks before our lunch that day. He had started growing distant, and while part of me was concerned, I chalked it up to the usual stress that comes with being a doctor. Our jobs are demanding, often leaving us mentally and physically drained, so I obviously didn't think much of it at first. We had both been through rough patches before due to the pressures of work, and I assumed this was just another one of those times. I kept telling myself that he would eventually open up once things settled down, that his mood would improve after his conference, and that we'd get back to normal. But sitting across from him at lunch that day, watching him barely acknowledge me, hardly speak, I began to feel more and more uneasy. Still, I tried to push the nervousness aside. I had waited long enough to tell him about the baby, and despite the tension between us, I was desperate to share the news. I thought maybe, just maybe, hearing about the pregnancy would snap him out of whatever was bothering him, and we could find joy in this life-changing moment together. But as I was gathering the courage to tell him, just when I was about to share the happiest news of our lives, Henry looked up from his plate, his voice low and steady, and said the words I never imagined hearing. "I've been cheating on you." At first, I didn't even register what he said. The restaurant was noisy, with conversations and clinking dishes all around us, and for a second, I thought I had misheard. I let out a nervous laugh and asked, "What?" As if his words had been some kind of mistake. But then he looked me in the eyes, something he hadn't really done all day, and repeated himself, this time more clearly, with an emotionless, almost detached tone. "I have been sleeping with your sister." In that moment, the world around me seemed to stop. My face went numb. My husband was sleeping with my sister, Lexi. Of all people, my sister. I stared at him, my mind struggling to grasp the meaning of his words. I asked him again, "What do you mean?" Though deep down, I already knew. I didn't want to believe it, but the look on his face left no room for doubt. He just sat there, staring straight at me with an expression so cold and emotionless, like this was just another fact he was stating, something casual and insignificant. There was no remorse, no sign of the man I thought I knew, the man I had loved and trusted for all these years. It felt like everything I had known, our marriage, our bond, even my own sister, was crumbling right in front of me, and I was powerless to stop it. My eyes began to well up with tears. I could feel the sting of betrayal deep in my chest. With a trembling voice, I asked him, "When did it start?" I needed to know. I wasn't sure why, but some part of me hoped that maybe this was all a mistake, a misunderstanding. He began to tell me, almost casually, how he and Lexi had been sleeping together for the past few months. My heart sank further with each word. He said it all started after Lexi had broken up with her last boyfriend. She was devastated after the breakup and had started coming over to our place frequently for support. I remember those days vividly. I had welcomed her into our home, wanting to be there for her during such a tough time. She was my sister, and I thought we were helping her heal. But little did I know, behind my back, Henry and Lexi were getting closer in ways I could have never imagined. Yes, they had always been friendly. In fact, I remember thinking at the time how nice it was that my husband and my sister got along so well. It gave me comfort, knowing that we were all so close as a family. But never in my wildest nightmares did I think they were that close. That they were sleeping together. I couldn't process the enormity of it, the betrayal from both of them. As Henry continued to speak, explaining his affair, I felt everything around me start to blur. I didn't want to hear him anymore. Nothing made sense. My stomach churned and I felt like I was going to be sick. So I grabbed my keys off the table and stood up abruptly. I didn't care that we were in the middle of a crowded restaurant. I didn't care that people might have been watching. I just had to get out of there. Henry started calling after me as I rushed toward the exit to find my car. It was only when I was in the car driving towards my house that I heard my phone ringing. It was Henry, of course. Over and over, he called me, not to apologize, but to scold me for abandoning him at the restaurant and for overreacting in front of everybody. I screamed into the phone, telling him to get an Uber and leave me alone. I could barely see the road through my tears as I drove home, my mind racing and my heart shattered. When I finally got home, I locked myself in our bedroom. That is when I broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of what had just happened crashed down on me. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. My husband, the man I loved, and my own sister, how could they betray me like this? I cried until I had no tears left, and my body was completely exhausted. At some point, Henry must have arrived back at the house. I heard him knocking on the bedroom door, his voice muffled through the wood. He kept saying he wanted to talk, but I couldn't bear to face him. I couldn't listen to him anymore. I refused to open the door, lying on the bed, curled up in a ball, as my tears stained the pillow. I didn't know how long I stayed like that, but at some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, it was already midnight. The house was eerily quiet, and Henry had stopped knocking. I decided to head downstairs to get something to eat as I felt hungry. When I got to the living room, I saw Henry asleep on the couch, his phone resting on the table next to him. The sight of him lying there, looking so peaceful, made my blood boil. How could he sleep so easily after what he had just confessed to me? I stood there for a moment, seething with anger and disbelief before my gaze shifted to his phone. I had never done this before, not once in our entire marriage, but that night, for the first time, I unlocked Henry's phone. He hadn't even bothered to change his passcode, which was the same one he'd always used because that's how confident he was that I'd never be suspicious of him. He was so sure of my trust, so certain I'd never doubt him. Oh, what a fool I had been. How could I have been so blind to what was happening right under my nose? As I scrolled through his messages with my sister, my heart raced, dreading what I would find but needing to know the full truth. And there it was, multiple inappropriate photos they had sent to each other, each one more painful to look at than the last. Explicit images of my husband and my own sister, laughing, teasing each other, and planning their secret meetings. They had even arranged to meet up in various hotels, while I had been completely oblivious. The texts from Lexi were what really shattered me. In one of them, she had written about how exciting it was to sleep with him behind my back, and how the thrill of deception made their affair even better. She went so far as to say that the sex felt better because of it. I couldn't believe this was real. My own sister, the person I had grown up with, and trusted, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And Henry, the man I had vowed to spend the rest of my life with, had so easily thrown our marriage away. With my hands trembling, I took photos of their messages on my own phone, needing to have evidence of what I had seen. Once I had what I needed, I went back upstairs. Quietly, I began packing my things. I knew I couldn't stay in that house, under the same roof as Henry. I wasn't going to raise this baby with an unfaithful husband who had so deeply shattered my trust. I threw a few essentials into a bag, trying to hold myself together, but my heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands shook with every item I packed. Once I was done, I drove straight to my parents' house, which was a town over. When I arrived at my parents' place, they were surprised to see me, but I didn't go into details right away. I couldn't. I just told them I needed to stay with them for a while, and thankfully, they didn't ask too many questions that night. Ever since that night, I've been staying with my parents. Yes, I'm currently going through the process of separating from Henry. After everything that has happened, I have wasted no time in filing for divorce. There's no going back after the betrayal I've experienced. My parents, too, are furious, and they've completely cut Lexi off after finding out about everything. They are embarrassed for what she has done, and she's no longer welcome in our family. Lexi has called me multiple times to apologize over and over, claiming that it was all just a huge mistake, but I don't know if I can ever forgive her. Ironically, the support I've received from Henry's family has been overwhelming, especially considering that it's their own son who caused this mess. From the moment they found out about his infidelity, they made it very clear that they were deeply disappointed in him. They don't approve of what he's done and have taken a firm stance. They've told him that they are going to refuse to accept my sister as part of their family. It's like they see Henry for who he truly is now, and they've made no effort to hide their disgust. I had kept my pregnancy a secret from Henry and his parents for as long as I could. The thought of sharing such happy news in the middle of all this chaos seemed impossible. But 2 weeks ago, after returning from my ultrasound appointment and talking about it with my parents, I couldn't keep this big news to myself any longer. When I finally met with Henry to tell him about the pregnancy, I had already mentally prepared myself for a difficult conversation. However, nothing could have prepared me for the cruelty of his reaction, as the first words out of his mouth were only accusations. He started accusing me of baby trapping him, claiming I was somehow trying to manipulate him into staying with me since I was jealous of my sister. His words cut deep. Then, he actually told me he wished I would have a miscarriage since he didn't want this baby anyway. He looked me in the eye, completely indifferent to how hurtful and disgusting his words were, and said if I continued along with the pregnancy, he wanted nothing to do with me or the baby. My body was trembling with anger hearing his words, and at that moment, if I hadn't been pregnant, I swear I would have punched him in the face without thinking twice. But I had to keep it together for the sake of my baby. The baby that he didn't want, the baby that was innocent in all of this chaos. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down, and made it clear to him that I wasn't trying to trap him or force him into anything. I had only told him about the pregnancy because it was my duty to inform him as the father of this child. But as for me, I wanted nothing to do with him, and he needn't worry about me ever wanting him back. All I expected from him was to fulfill his legal obligation and pay child support when the time came. It was as simple as that. His responsibilities might be something he could try to run from, but I wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. He tried to argue with me, of course. He always likes having the last word, but I just turned and walked away. Later, I also had to tell Henry's family about my pregnancy since I felt that they deserved to know. Their reaction was immediate. His parents came over as soon as they found out, and they've been nothing but supportive since. They've assured me repeatedly that if Henry continues to not accept responsibility for the baby, then they'll make sure that the child is well taken care of. In fact, they're so furious with Henry that they've gone as far as to say they'll make sure his part of the inheritance will go directly to the baby, not to him. They've made it clear that if he chooses this life with Lexi and abandons his responsibility to be a present father for the child, then he won't see a penny of his inheritance ever again. Well, after that conversation with Henry and his family, I received a message from Lexi this week, who apologized to me again and informed me that she hated herself for how she had broken up my family and that after finding out that I was pregnant, she had decided to leave Henry for good. She assured me that she would never show her face to me ever again and that all she wished for was for my baby to grow up well. I never even bothered to reply back to her message, but now, Henry's behavior seems to have completely shifted. After everything he's put me through, from his cruel accusations of baby trapping to wishing harm on our child, he suddenly wants another chance. Although he still has no idea about the promise his parents have made to ensure our baby receives his inheritance, what is driving him, though, is the fact that his entire world has started to collapse around him. Lexi has left him. His family has completely turned their backs on him, and even our co-workers at the hospital have distanced themselves from him. The once confident, arrogant man who thought he could get away with anything is now feeling alone and humiliated because he's facing the consequences of his own actions. So, now, he has conveniently decided that he wants to be a part of my life again. And for the sake of our child, no less. He has been trying to frame it as though he suddenly cares about creating a stable environment for our baby to grow up in. When I laughed at his absurd demands and told him I wasn't going back to him, he didn't take it well, of course. True to form, he turned things around and attacked me again, calling me a bad mother. According to him, I'm the one who's going to ruin our child's life because I won't let him play happy family now that his life has fallen apart for his own stupid mistakes. He even went as far as to say he would make sure our child grows up hating me for breaking up our family. Ida for divorcing my husband after what he has done? Update 1. To clarify a few points, as for everyone asking about the kind of relationship Lexi and I have had to understand a bit more about why my sister would do this to me, well, what can I say, we have had a normal sibling relationship all our lives. Neither of us was the golden child of the family and both of us were equally loved by our parents. We never had any major fights or jealousy between us. I have always loved my sister through thick and thin, which is why this hurts more. My sister did something I can't imagine doing to anyone, not even an enemy. I am glad that Lexi left him after finding out about my pregnancy. I mean, that man had the audacity to break up our marriage thinking that he could get away with a younger version of me, but too bad, he lost her too. Of course, this doesn't mean that I am going to ever forgive Lexi, but I am just glad that Henry is all alone now. Update 2. Henry decided to come over to my parents' palace to try to fix things again, but this time things got even worse. First, he started to convince me again to get back together. He told me how parents sometimes need to make sacrifices for the sake of their children. He went on about how our baby deserved to grow up with 2 parents instead of 1. But I was tired of this narrative. I reminded him bluntly that not too long ago, he didn't even want this baby. He had wished I would have a miscarriage, for crying out loud. Now, suddenly, he's preaching about the importance of family and sacrifice. When I threw that in his face, he tried to backtrack, saying that maybe once he held the baby, his mind would change. His words were hollow, just like every promise he had ever made. I told him straight to his face, he slept with my sister. There was zero chance of us ever getting back together. No amount of pleading or guilt tripping was going to change that. But instead of accepting responsibility, Henry decided to turn things around on me. He started accusing me of his affair by saying how I had stopped showing him affection for months and that I was always busy with work. He claimed he had expected me to slow down my career after we got married, but I never did. I couldn't help but scoff. This was classic Henry, always trying to shift the blame, and make me feel like I was the one at fault for his betrayal. He knew exactly who I was before we got married. We had been co-workers for years before we got together, so why was he suddenly acting surprised that I was passionate about my career? It wasn't like I ever hid my ambitions from him. In fact, we had bonded over our shared drive to succeed in medicine. I reminded him of this and told him that I wasn't about to apologize for working hard, especially since he had been doing the exact same thing for years. This is who I am, and I wasn't going to let him gaslight me. That's when he started whining about Lexi. He said she had been there for him when he was feeling vulnerable, and he blamed me for not even noticing that he had been cheating on me for months. It was as if he was trying to make me feel guilty for not catching him in the act sooner, as if that somehow excused his betrayal. At this point, I was seething. I told him flat out that he needed to stop trying to blame me for his infidelity. He was the one who crossed the line, not me. And even his own parents knew that what he did was unforgivable. They had taken my side for a reason. They saw him for who he really was. Henry scoffed, his arrogance flaring up again, and said that his parents loved him and would eventually forgive him no matter what. So that's when I couldn't hold it in any longer. I told him the truth, that his parents were done with him and that they had already decided to cut him off from his inheritance. Not only that, but all that money was going to our baby instead of him. I watched his face crumble as the realization hit him. For the first time since all of this began, he was at a loss for words. His usual confidence, his smugness had all vanished in an instant. And I won't lie, I did feel a certain satisfaction watching him process the consequences of his actions. After everything he had put me through, seeing him finally face some real consequences was a small, but significant, moment of justice. He started yelling at me, calling me vile and disgusting for ruining his life, and how he wished he had cheated on me sooner. I just shook my head and asked him to leave as this entire conversation was getting pointless. Then, Henry got aggressively close to me and kept yelling, which made me feel really uncomfortable. At this point, my parents, who were in the other room and had tried to give me some privacy, came out to check on me since they could hear Henry's loud words. When my dad saw Henry just inches from my face, and me cowering, in an instant, he rushed over and pulled Henry away. Then, I watched as my dad punched Henry in the face. Henry became disoriented at first and couldn't understand what had just happened. Then my dad, towering over him, grabbed him by the collar, dragged him out, and shoved him out the door. I watched as my dad threatened him loudly that if he ever showed his face again to us, it would be the last day on this earth. Since then, there's been complete silence from Henry for days. I guess he has been really shaken up by everything. He hasn't called or texted, and I've finally found some peace. I'm so grateful my dad stood up for me, and I can't wait to divorce this horrible man and close this chapter of my life for good. Update 3, it's been 8 months since my last update. I just wanted to update everyone who has been following my story. As for my pregnancy, I did give birth, and my daughter has been doing well. Henry's parents have set up a trust fund for her and have continued to visit me. They want nothing to do with Henry and have completely iced him out of the family. I've finally gotten the divorce I wanted from my ex-husband and have full custody of my child for now. The only thing Henry is responsible for is sending child support. Furthermore, he didn't fight me over anything during our divorce proceedings and ended up paying a hefty alimony due to his affair. Lexi does send me messages here and there, but overall, she hasn't bothered me much, which is the greatest gift she could have given me after everything she put me through. I don't think she and Henry will ever get back together, but honestly, I don't care anymore. I am currently focused on my work and raising my daughter to be a good human being. That's all.